They laugh when everything feels quiet, don't they? When the room is calm, when life pretends nothing is changing. But chaos doesn't knock on the door with noise. It slips in slowly, wearing a familiar face, standing closer each day, watching you when you think no one cares. You can feel it in the air, the way people start noticing you differently, the way silence between two souls gets heavier. Someone is moving toward you, not by accident, not by chance, but because broken paths always find each other. And the funny thing is, you won't hear them coming. You'll feel them when it's already too close. It never starts with a sound. That's what people get wrong. They think connections announce themselves, make a mess, shake the ground. No, the real ones creep in while you're distracted, while you're busy pretending you've got everything under control. One day you wake up and something feels different, not loud, not obvious, just off, like someone moved a chair in your mind and didn't bother to tell you. You brush it away because that's what you're good at, ignoring the things that don't fit your plan. But this isn't following a plan. This is forming on its own. You don't notice the first signs because they don't look important. A longer pause in a conversation. A look that lasts half a second too long. A name that suddenly feels heavier when you hear it. Nothing dramatic. Nothing worth panicking over. And yet, somewhere between one ordinary moment and the next, an invisible thread tightens. You're not reaching for it. They're not either. That's the trick. When a connection is forced, you feel the strain. When it's real, it feels like gravity doing what it always does. You've been alone in your own way for a long time. Not lonely. There's a difference. You've mastered the art of standing in a crowd and feeling untouched, of smiling without letting anyone get close enough to see the cracks. You tell yourself you're safer this way. Fewer expectations, fewer disappointments. Then this person appears, not as a solution, not as a savior, just as a presence that refuses to stay small. They don't invade your space. They just exist closer than anyone else has in a while. At first, you resist it. You tell yourself it's coincidence, habit, boredom. You've said these lies before, and they usually work. But this time, the lies sound thin, because you catch yourself thinking about them when there's no reason to. Not in a romantic, dramatic way. More like a recurring thought you didn't invite. You start noticing patterns, how your mood shifts when they're around, how silence with them doesn't feel empty, how even disagreements feel less like battles and more like mirrors. An unexpected connection doesn't rush. It studies you. It watches how you react, how you protect yourself, how you joke when things get too close to the truth. It learns your defenses without trying to break them. And that's what makes it dangerous. You don't feel attacked. You feel seen, not exposed seen. There's a difference, and your instincts don't know how to handle it. You're used to fighting or fleeing, not standing still while someone quietly understands you. You notice how conversations drift toward deeper places without effort. How laughter comes easier, darker, more honest. How they don't flinch when you show the rough edges you usually hide. Most people want the polished version, the easy version. This one doesn't seem impressed by masks. They listen differently. Not to reply, not to fix, but to absorb. And suddenly, you're talking more than you planned to, revealing things you swore you'd keep locked away. What scares you isn't the closeness. It's how natural it feels. No fireworks, no dramatic declaration. Just a slow alignment. Like two broken pieces realizing they fit without being forced. You've always believed that anything important has to hurt first. That piece is suspicious. So when this connection feels calm, steady, almost inevitable, your mind looks for the catch. You wait for the punchline. Because in your world, there's always a punchline. You test them without realizing it. A sharp comment here. Distance there. Silence stretched just to see if they'll disappear like the others. But they don't play along. They don't chase, don't beg, don't vanish. They stay consistent, and consistency messes with you more than chaos ever did. Chaos is familiar. You know how to dance with it. This quiet pull, this mutual recognition, this unspoken understanding, it doesn't follow your rules. And slowly, the truth becomes harder to ignore. This connection wasn't planned because it didn't need permission. It formed because two people carrying their own fractures crossed paths at the wrong or maybe the right time, because something in you recognized something in them before logic had a chance to interfere. Because sometimes the most unexpected connections aren't accidents at all, they are collisions delayed until both sides are just damaged enough to notice each other standing there, closer than before, close enough that pulling away would mean admitting you felt it too. It doesn't shout for attention. It doesn't demand explanations or grand gestures. It just sits there, quiet, patient, tugging at you when you're least prepared. A silent emotional pull isn't something you notice right away because it doesn't interrupt your routine. It slips between moments, hides in the pauses, waits until you stop pretending you're unaffected. You go about your day like nothing's changed, but something keeps pulling your focus sideways, like a magnet buried under the floor. You don't talk about it because how do you explain something you can't hear or see? There's no clear reason, no logical chain of events you can point to and say, this is why. You just feel it. A subtle shift in your chest when they walk into the room. A strange heaviness when they leave. It's not obsession. It's not desperation. It's recognition doing its work in silence. And that silence makes it unsettling because you can't argue with something that isn't speaking. You try to ignore it at first. You tell yourself you're imagining things, that you're bored, tired, overthinking. You've blamed your mind before. It's an easy scapegoat. But the pull doesn't weaken. If anything, it becomes more precise. It knows exactly when to show up. When you're alone. When you're quiet. When you're lying to yourself the hardest. That's when it tightens just enough to remind you it's there. What makes it worse is how calm it feels. You're used to emotions being loud, messy, destructive. You're used to chaos that announces itself with raised voices and slammed doors. This is different. This doesn't rush you. It doesn't corner you. It simply exists, steady and unavoidable. And that calm terrifies you more than madness ever could. Because calm doesn't give you something to fight. You catch yourself reacting before thinking. Your mood adjusts around them without permission. Your guard lowers in ways you don't remember allowing. You listen more. You hesitate less. You find yourself caring without making a decision to care. That's the dangerous part. When emotions are loud, you can shut them down. When they're silent, they bypass your defenses completely. There's no dramatic moment where you say, this is happening. No confession, no realization that hits like lightning. It's more like erosion. A slow wearing down of walls you spent years building, brick by brick, without noise, without resistance. One day you notice you're leaning in when they speak. Another day you notice you're disappointed when they don't. And you wonder when exactly that started, knowing full well you'll never find the answer. The pull doesn't ask for closeness. It creates it. You don't move toward them. You just end up nearer than before. Conversations stretch longer without effort. Silence feels heavier, not awkward, just loaded. You're aware of them even when nothing is happening, especially when nothing is happening. That awareness hums in the background, low and constant, like a note that never fades. You've survived louder things. Pain that screamed, loss that shattered, anger that burned everything in reach. This feels harmless by comparison. That's the illusion, because a silent emotional pull doesn't destroy you all at once. It changes the way you stand, the way you look at the room, the way you measure distance between yourself and others. It rewrites your internal balance without ever asking your permission. You start noticing how others fade into noise while this one presence stays sharp. How advice from friends sounds distant. How distractions stop working. You laugh, you talk, you function, but something inside you is always angled in their direction. Not chasing, not clinging, just oriented. Like your emotional compass has recalibrated itself around a new north. And the most unsettling part is that they don't seem to be trying. No manipulation, no pursuit, no pressure. The pull exists whether either of you acknowledge it or not. That's what makes it feel inevitable. Like gravity, like something fundamental you can't argue with, only deny for so long before the strain of pretending becomes heavier than the truth sitting quietly between two people who have said a word about what's already moving them closer. drawing them in without sound, without warning, without mercy. You don't recognize it at first because it doesn't feel new. That's the unsettling part. It feels familiar in a way that makes your skin crawl just a little, like walking into a room you've never seen before but knowing exactly where the light switch is. Something about this energy doesn't introduce itself. It doesn't ask who you are or what you want. It behaves like it already knows, like it's been here before, just waiting for the right moment to step back into your space. You've changed since the last time you felt anything like this. You're sharper now, more careful. Life taught you how to keep your distance, how to smile without opening doors, how to survive without relying on anyone. So when this familiar energy shows up again, it doesn't feel comforting at first. It feels intrusive, like a past you buried quietly, deciding to breathe again. You tell yourself you're imagining it, because that's easier than admitting something old just found its way back to you wearing a different face. There's a rhythm to it, a way conversations fall into place too easily, a way reactions match without explanation. You finish thoughts you didn't realize you were sharing. You laugh at things that don't sound funny to anyone else. It's not chemistry in the flashy sense. It's alignment. And alignment is dangerous when you've spent so long being misaligned on purpose just to stay safe. This energy doesn't rush toward you. It doesn't cling. It hovers close enough to be felt, far enough to be denied. That's how you know it's real. Forced connections demand attention. Familiar ones wait. They let you circle them, inspect them, doubt them. They know that eventually you'll notice the pattern, the repetition, the way your guard drops without a fight when they're near. You start remembering parts of yourself you thought were gone, the darker humor, the honesty you only allow in your own head, the part of you that observes instead of participates. This person doesn't look at you like you're strange when those parts surface. They recognize them, not with excitement, with understanding. And that recognition hits harder than praise ever could. It's uncomfortable because it disrupts the version of yourself you've been performing. You've worked hard to become controlled, predictable, contained. This familiar energy doesn't break that control, it bypasses it. You don't feel exposed. You feel acknowledged. And that's worse, because now you're aware of how much you've been hiding, not from others, but from yourself. You test the feeling by pulling back. Create distance. Acting indifferent. The energy doesn't disappear. It doesn't chase you either. It remains steady, unchanged, like it knows you'll be back in range eventually. That patience unnerves you. You're used to people reacting. This one just stays the same. Same tone, same presence, same quiet pull, as if time doesn't affect it. There's history in the way it moves, even if you can't trace it to a memory. It feels like unfinished business without a past conversation, like a chapter you don't remember reading, but somehow know the ending of. You've always believed familiarity comes from shared experiences. This proves otherwise. Sometimes it comes from shared damage, shared ways of seeing the world that only form after things go wrong. You catch yourself relaxing in moments you usually stay tense, letting silence exist without filling it, letting your thoughts slow down. That's when it becomes clear this energy isn't here to excite you. It's here to unsettle you in a quieter way, to remind you of who you were before you learned how to numb everything just to function. It doesn't promise anything. It doesn't demand anything. It simply returns again and again, in small moments, in glances, in timing, in the strange comfort of being understood without explanation. And the more you feel it, the harder it becomes to pretend this is just another passing interaction. Because passing things don't feel like home you forgot you ever lived in, don't awaken parts of you that went silent for survival, don't stand this close without pushing or pulling, just wait while something old and unresolved stirs awake inside you, smiling quietly, knowing you felt this before. Even if you refuse to admit it now, they don't say much, and that's what makes it loud. Attention without words is the kind that crawls under your skin because it doesn't give you anything to grab onto. No compliments, no obvious interest. Just a presence that feels focused, deliberate, almost unsettling. You catch It enfragments eyes, lingering a second longer than necessary. Awareness that doesn't fade when the conversation ends, a sense of being noticed even when nothing is being exchanged. It's not staring, it's observing. And observation, when it's intentional, has weight. You're used to noise, people explaining themselves, selling versions of who they are, filling silence like it's a crime. This is different. This attention doesn't rush to be understood. It doesn't need validation. It simply exists, calm and steady, like it's already made its decision and doesn't care whether you notice or not. That's what unsettles you. Because part of you does notice, and part of you pretends not to. You feel it before you think about it. A subtle tightening in your shoulders. A shift in how you carry yourself. You become more aware of your tone, your movements, your pauses, not because you want to impress, but because something about their quiet focus makes you feel visible, not exposed, not judged, just seen in a way that doesn't ask permission. Words give you room to deflect, to joke, to redirect. Silence leaves you nowhere to hide. They don't interrupt. They don't dominate conversation. They listen like they're collecting information they don't need to comment on yet. And when they do speak, it's measured, precise, like every word passed through a filter first. That restraint gives their silence authority. You start wondering what they see when they look at you, not in a flattering way, in a curious, unsettling way, like they're noticing patterns you haven't admitted to yourself. Attention without words creates space, and space is dangerous. In that space, your mind fills the gaps. You replay interaction. You question your reaction. You wonder if they notice the hesitation, the sarcasm, the crack in your voice when something got too close to the truth. You tell yourself you're overthinking, but the feeling doesn't go away, because this attention isn't accidental. It's consistent. And consistency always means intention. You test it subtly, change your behavior, pull back, act uninterested. The attention adjusts, but doesn't disappear. It doesn't punish you with distance or reward you with closeness. It remains balanced, like it's not playing the same game as everyone else. That throws you off. You're used to reactions you can predict. This one refuses to be predictable, and that makes you pay more attention than you want to admit. There's a power dynamic in silence people underestimate. Loud interest tries to control the outcome. Quiet attention lets the outcome reveal itself. They don't chase moments, they let moments come to them. And somehow those moments keep involving you. You find yourself talking more openly than usual, not because you're encouraged, but because their silence doesn't interrupt your honesty. It absorbs it. You realize they remember details they never commented on. Things you mentioned casually, things you assumed were ignored. That's when it clicks. This attention has been active the whole time. Watching, listening, processing. While you thought nothing was happening, something was being built quietly in the background. Not an attachment, not a plan, an understanding. It's unsettling because it feels deliberate without being aggressive. There's no pressure to respond, no expectation placed on you. And yet, you feel drawn into their awareness, like stepping into a spotlight that does to blind you, just warms you enough to notice you've been cold for a long time. You don't know what they want, and that uncertainty keeps your guard half raised, half lowered, stuck in an uncomfortable middle ground. Attention without words doesn't ask questions. It invites answers. And the longer it stays, the harder it becomes to pretend you're unaffected. Because even when they're not looking at you, you feel like they still are. Like something about you has already been registered, filed away, understood in a way that doesn't require confirmation. And that realization lingers, sharp and quiet, making you aware that some connections aren't formed through conversation, but through the uncomfortable clarity of being noticed without explanation, without commentary, without escape. You never hear it working. That's the joke. Everyone expects fate to announce itself with signs, coincidences so obvious they feel staged. But real fate doesn't like attention. It prefers subtlety. It rearranges things while you're busy surviving, while you're convinced nothing important is happening. You call it routine, habit, another ordinary day. Meanwhile, something unseen is adjusting distances, nudging timing, placing people just close enough to collide without realizing they were being guided there all along. You think you're making choices. That's adorable. You tell yourself you decided to show up that day, to take that route, to say that one unnecessary sentence. But decisions don't feel so intentional when you look back and realize how perfectly misaligned everything had to be before it worked. Delays that annoyed you, detours you complained about, moments you almost skipped. Fate works quietly by disguising itself as inconvenience. It knows if it made sense, you'd resist it. You don't notice the pattern forming because it doesn't repeat loudly. It repeats accurately. You keep crossing paths with the same presence at odd moments, not often enough to feel planned, just enough to feel strange. You brush it off as coincidence because coincidence is comforting. Coincidence doesn't demand responsibility. Fate does. Fate implies that something is unfolding whether you approve or not. What unsettles you is how natural it feels. No effort, no forcing. Conversations start mid-thought, like they've been continuing somewhere you can't remember. Timing lines up in ways that don't benefit either of you, yet still matter. You're not gaining anything obvious from these moments, which makes them harder to explain. Fate rarely offers immediate rewards. It offers alignment first, understanding later. You've spent years believing you're in control because control was the only thing that made the chaos bearable. You learned to manage damage, not prevent it. So when something begins moving smoothly without your intervention, your instincts don't celebrate. They grow suspicious. You wait for the trap, the twist, the punchline, because nothing good ever arrived quietly in your experience. It always kicked the door down, but this doesn't. This slips in through the cracks. It works in timing instead of drama, in proximity instead of promises. You start realizing that certain moments couldn't have happened any other way without collapsing the whole sequence. One missed second, and the interaction wouldn't exist. One different mood and the connection would dissolve. That level of precision doesn't come from chance. Chance is sloppy. This is careful. Fate doesn't rush you because it doesn't need to. It knows resistance burns itself out faster than acceptance, so it waits while you doubt, while you question motives, while you try to rationalize something that doesn't operate on logic. It lets you exhaust every excuse until silence is all you have left. And in that silence, the alignment becomes obvious. You notice how your defenses fail in small ways, not all at once, just enough to matter. You speak more honestly without planning to. You react less defensively. You stop rehearsing outcomes. That's how fate confirms its progress, not through big events, but through changes in how you respond. When the fight leaves you without realizing you stopped swinging, it's working quietly because loud interference would scare you off. Fate knows your patterns, knows you distrust intensity but tolerate inevitability, so it builds pressure slowly, like water wearing down stone. You don't feel overwhelmed. You feel guided, which is far more unsettling because guidance implies direction, and direction implies that where you've been standing isn't where you're meant to stay. You try to step away mentally, tell yourself you're reading too much into it. But fate doesn't need belief to function. It doesn't collapse when you doubt it. It continues regardless, placing moments in your path that feel increasingly difficult to ignore. Not dramatic, just persistent, like a thought that keeps returning no matter how many times you dismiss it. Eventually, you realize something important has shifted. Not outside, inside. Your internal resistance has weakened. Not because you were convinced, but because you were outmaneuvered. Fate didn't argue with you. It waited until you were ready without asking whether you wanted to be. That's the quiet part people never talk about. Fate doesn't force. It positions. It aligns. It closes distances so gradually that by the time you notice how close something is, stepping back will require admitting that none of this was random. That something unseen has been arranging pieces while you laughed, distracted, convinced nothing was happening, unaware that the most significant movements in your life never needed your attention to begin with broken paths, don't look like they're going anywhere. That's why people step over them without thinking. Cracks in the road, detours, half-built bridges that lead nowhere. You've been walking one of those paths for a long time, pretending it. Intentional, telling yourself this is just how things turned out. You call it experience, you call it wisdom. Really, it's just damage, arranged neatly enough to survive with. And somewhere else, someone else has been doing the same thing, walking their own fractured route, convinced their direction makes sense. Because stopping would mean looking too closely at how they got there. Alignment doesn't happen when things are perfect. That's the lie everyone sells. Perfect paths run parallel. They never touch. It's the broken ones that bend, that twist, that eventually curve toward each other because damage changes direction. Every disappointment you absorbed, every trust you buried, every version of yourself you abandoned to keep moving, those weren't delays. They were adjustments. You didn't see it then because pain doesn't come with a map. It just pushes you forward until forward becomes sideways, then inward. When broken paths start aligning, it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like tension easing in places you forgot were tight. You notice it in small reactions, less resistance, less effort. You don't have to explain your pauses or justify your silence. The other path understands the terrain because it's been walking something just as uneven. Different story, same fractures. And fractures recognize each other without introductions. You don't bond over shared happiness. That's shallow. You align over shared damage patterns. The way you both hesitate before trusting. The way humor turns dark before it turns honest. The way you observe before you engage. These aren't traits you learned from books. They're survival mechanisms refined over time. And when you see them reflected back at you, something clicks, not excitement, not hope, but familiarity sharp enough to cut through your defenses. At first, you're cautious. Alignment feels suspicious when you've spent years adapting to misalignment. You're used to explaining yourself, adjusting your tone, shrinking parts of you to keep the peace. This doesn't demand that. It doesn't require you to perform or pretend, and that absence of pressure is unnerving. You wait for the moment where it falls apart, where the similarities turn into conflict, because in your experience, things that fit too well usually hide a flaw. But broken paths don't collide violently. They merge gradually. You find yourselves thinking the same thing without saying it, reacting similarly to situations that confuse everyone else. You don't always agree, but even disagreement feels structured, contained. Like both sides understand the rules of engagement because you've both been hurt by chaos before. There's an unspoken respect for boundaries forged by past violations. What's strange is how little effort it takes. Alignment doesn't ask you to change. It reveals how much you already have. You don't feel improved. You feel recognized. And recognition is dangerous because it removes excuses. You can't blame misunderstanding anymore. You can't hide behind the idea that no one gets you, someone does. Not because they tried hard, but because their path carved them into a shape that fits alongside yours. You start seeing your past differently. Not as wasted time, but as necessary distortion. Every wrong turn led you away from something that wouldn't have aligned anyway. Every collapse forced you to rebuild with stronger angles. Broken paths don't apologize for the damage they carry. They use it. They let it determine where they can go next. And where they go next is often towards something equally scarred, equally cautious, equally capable of standing without leaning too hard. There's no dramatic moment where you acknowledge the alignment. No agreement. No declaration. That would ruin it. This kind of connection exists best when it's unannounced, when it grows in the background while you're still pretending you're unaffected. You notice it in the way your guard stays lowered longer, in how you don't rehearse exits anymore, in how silence feels less like absence and more like shared space. Broken paths aligning doesn't mean healing is complete. It means healing has context now. Your damage isn't isolated anymore. It exists alongside someone else's, without competition, without comparison. That alone shifts something fundamental. You're not fixing each other. You're standing next to someone who understands why certain parts can't be fixed yet. And that's the part people don't talk about. Alignment isn't about becoming whole. It's about realizing you don't have to be. Two fractured routes can still lead forward together, not because they were destined, not because it's poetic, but because damage bends direction in similar ways. And sometimes that's enough to bring two people close without either of them having to pretend they aren't still cracked, still cautious, still walking carefully. On ground that only looks stable from a distance, change doesn't arrive with permission. It doesn't wait for you to feel ready or strong or certain. It shows up before impact, before the collision, before you understand what's about to shift. That's the cruel humor of it. You feel restless without knowing why. Irritated by things that never bothered you, uncomfortable in routines you once depended on. Nothing is wrong on the surface, but underneath, something is loosening its grip, preparing to move whether you cooperate or not. You start noticing the cracks in your habits. The patterns that kept you stable now feel tight, restrictive, almost insulting. You question decisions you defended for years. You replay moments you thought were settled. It's not regret. It's recalibration. Change doesn't destroy, first it destabilizes. It makes the familiar feel foreign, so you'll stop clinging to it out of habit. You call it a phase. You tell yourself it'll pass. It doesn't. It sharpens. There's a tension in the air, subtle but constant, like pressure building behind your eyes. You can't explain it to anyone because nothing specific has happened yet. That's the part that makes you feel crazy. You're reacting to something that hasn't arrived. But your instincts know better than your logic. They sense movement before your mind catches up. They recognize the tremor before the quake. You become more observant, less patient with nonsense, less tolerant of distractions. Things that once numbed you stop working. Entertainment feels hollow. Noise feels exhausting. You crave quiet without knowing what you're listening for. That's change clearing space. It doesn't bring the new in immediately. It removes the unnecessary first. And removal always feels like loss before it feels like relief. You feel exposed, like you're standing a little too close to the edge of something you can't see yet. Conversations hit differently. Words land harder. Silences stretch longer. You're more aware of what matters and painfully aware of what doesn't. That awareness isn't comfortable. It isolates you in your own head. You start pulling away, not from people, but from versions of yourself that no longer fit. There's fear in this stage, even if you refuse to name it. Fear of disruption. Fear of losing control. Fear that whatever's coming will cost you something you're not ready to give up. And it will. Change always does. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't compromise. It just asks one question over and over in different ways. Are you paying attention yet? You sense the impact coming before you see it. Like hearing footsteps behind you without turning around. You move differently. You speak more carefully or more honestly, depending on which scares you less. You start preparing without knowing what you're preparing for. Strengthening boundaries. Questioning loyalties. Letting go of expectations quietly so it hurts less when they break. People around you might not notice anything different. That's the irony. The biggest changes happen internally long before they show externally. You're already shifting while the world thinks you're the same. And when the impact finally happens, when the person arrives, the truth surfaces. The situation collapses or aligns. It looks sudden to everyone else. To you, it feels overdue. You realize you've been bracing for this without realizing it. The sleepless nights. The overthinking, the strange calm mixed with dread. Those weren't anxiety. They were preparation, your mind reinforcing itself, your instincts sharpening, your emotional armor adjusting to a new kind of threat or opportunity. Change doesn't always come to break you. Sometimes it comes to test whether you've actually learned anything from what already did. There's no clean line between before and after. Just a growing awareness that standing still isn't an option anymore. You feel it in your posture, in your tone, in the way you stop explaining yourself. You're no longer waiting for clarity. You're waiting for confirmation of something you already sense. The ground feels different under your feet. Not unstable, just unfamiliar. Change before impact is the warning most people ignore. They keep walking like nothing's happening until the collision forces them to look up. You don't get that luxury anymore. You feel it coming. You feel yourself adjusting, shedding weight, sharpening edges, stepping slightly to the side of who you were yesterday. And whatever's approaching won't meet the old version of you. It'll meet someone already altered, already aware, already standing in the space between what was comfortable and what's unavoidable, watching the distance close, knowing the moment of contact isn't the beginning. It's just the point where everyone else finally noticed what you've been living with for a while. Now, readiness doesn't feel like confidence. That's the lie people believe. Confidence is loud, dressed up, eager to be seen. Readiness is quiet and uncomfortable. It shows up as stillness, as restraint, as a strange calm that settles in your chest when chaos should be winning. You don't announce you're ready. You don't even admit it to yourself. You just stop running in the moments where you used to disappear. Before closeness, there's a pause, a long one, a space where nothing happens outwardly, but everything rearranges internally. You notice you're less reactive, less desperate to be understood. You stop explaining your silence and stop apologizing for your boundaries. That's not healing. That's preparation. Readiness sharpens you by removing the need to prove anything. When you're not ready, you reach. When you are, you hold your ground. You've learned what closeness costs. Not from theory, but from experience that took pieces with it when it left. So readiness doesn't come from optimism. It comes from memory, from knowing exactly how bad it can get, and still choosing not to shut down completely. That's strength people don't clap for. That's strength that doesn't show up on the surface, but changes how you breathe when someone stands a little too close. You start paying attention to your internal signals instead of ignoring them. You don't rush into conversations. You don't overshare to fill silence. You don't retreat the second something feels intense. You sit with the discomfort. You let it exist without immediately reacting. That's readiness learning to trust itself. You're not fearless. You're familiar with fear enough not to let it drive anymore. Closeness doesn't arrive all at once. It approaches carefully, testing whether you'll flinch. And this time, you don't. Not because you're numb, but because you're grounded. You've already done the work no one saw. You've already fought the internal battles, replayed the worst-case scenarios, survived them in your head. When closeness comes, it doesn't surprise you. It meets you already standing. You're more selective now, not cold, intentional. You notice patterns faster. You sense misalignment early. And instead of forcing yourself to adapt like you used to, you let distance remain where it belongs. That's not avoidance. That's discernment. Readiness means knowing that not every door deserves to be opened just because someone knocks. You've made peace with your contradictions. The fact that you want connection but value solitude. That you crave depth but fear exposure. That you're strong but still carry bruises. You stop seeing these as flaws to fix and start treating them as parameters to respect. When closeness approaches, it doesn't find you pretending anymore. It finds you honest. And honesty is the only stable ground intimacy can stand on. There's a patience in you now that wasn't there before. You don't rush timelines. You don't demand clarity before it's earned. You let things unfold without gripping them too tightly. That patience isn't passive. It's watchful. You're aware of what you're allowing into your space, and more importantly, what you're not. Readiness isn't about opening every gate. It's about guarding the right ones while leaving room for something real to step through. You're no longer trying to be chosen. That's the shift. You're present without performing, available without chasing. You don't disappear to protect yourself, but you also don't bend to be accepted. That balance took time. It took mistakes. It took learning that closeness built on fear collapses under pressure. This time, you're not building on fear. You're building on awareness.